All right, guys. Good morning, good afternoon. We are here today to deliver day two of our notes on progressivism with a little bit of focus on Teddy Roosevelt, who I think is a very good president and is, quite frankly, also kind of a fascinating president. The accidental president, as it were. Let's get into it. So, how has the accidental president come about? Well, he's the youngest president ever put into office, and it's because of the assassination of William McKinley in 1901. Teddy Roosevelt had been his vice president um, for McKinley's second term, and really was kind of uh, not a political newcomer, but was not necessarily a man with the resume you would expect a uh, of a vice president. He had been, commissioner of New York City Police Department. He had been a New York State legislator. But outside of that, his political experience had been a failed gubernatorial campaign in New York. He had been a Western rancher out in the Badlands of South Dakota. Of course, he had been a military hero in the Spanish American War in Cuba. But he comes about his presidency quite by accident and quite young of age. Um, he proves himself worthy of the office in that what we're going to see today is that Roosevelt certainly has what we would call some progressive tendencies, but he's very deliberate in how he goes about implementing policy, which is interesting because he's kind of seen as this kind of cowboy wild man type figure, being the Rough Rider, but he becomes a champion of cautious, moderate change. He thinks that the federal government should be a mediator of the public good, but not necessarily an agent for any one particular interest, whether it be, a progressive interest or, has the government had been, in bed with big business, as it were. Um, he felt like large corporations and trusts should very often be regulated instead of necessarily broken up. He felt like there is value in the pressure of public opinion. And so he wants to utilize the government to investigate what he would call bad trusts and bad business practices. Ultimately, what he wants to do is provide good policy for both business and the people. He does use the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up some securities corporation, the Northern Securities Corporation, a large railroad monopoly. So he's okay with utilizing the government when he sees fit. But again, it's about kind of moderation and, in some cases, mediation. Famously, Teddy Roosevelt mediates a strike dispute between mine operators and their coal miners in 1902 as president, okay, in Pennsylvania. So he's very much balanced in his approach to this kind of pendulum we've talked about, kind of swinging between this Gilded Age and this movement of progressivism that we're getting into. What he calls it is the square deal. Okay, and that's a term we need to know. It's where Roosevelt believes that he can come about offering a fair solution to all sides in disputes. I know, a crazy, radical idea that, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But this is his mantra. And upon fulfilling McKinley's first term, Roosevelt easily wins re-election in 1904. Uh, he does assist many progressive causes. He does get on board with some causes pushed by the quote unquote muckrakers, right? It is Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, after all, that helps to create Pure Food and Drug Act, which is kind of a precursor to today's FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And he is responding to some of that public pressure that was created by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. But as I hinted at in class the other day, Teddy Roosevelt, being this kind of cautious man of moderate change, uh, kind of takes exception to a little bit of the way that Sinclair had characterized exactly what's going on in the meatpacking industry. He thinks that he is exaggerated. In fact, it is Teddy Roosevelt that coins the term muckraker itself. He feels like these journalists, these writers, these political cartoonists, the Thomas Nasts, the Upton Sinclairs, the Jacob Riis, that all they are doing is mucking up the filth and the grime and exaggerating it. It's akin, if you will, to this notion of yellow journalism that we had talked about, that tabloid journalism that kind of led to, driving public opinion in the days prefacing the Spanish American War. So Roosevelt is a progressive, sure, but he's not quite on board with the muckrakers, right? Again, he is about this square deal, finding balance, finding a fair solution to all sides. There's a depiction here of Roosevelt, right, in this political cartoon, where he's certainly throwing in a good bit of progressivism, um, but he's got the jar of eggs going into this recipe with conservative views as well. Maybe a little bit of radical spice over there. Okay, and that's what we mean by Teddy Roosevelt and the square deal. This notion that he can find a fair solution to all sides in a dispute. That's what he wants to deliver to the American people: a square deal that is good for business, good for workers, good for consumers, good for the nation. Teddy Roosevelt's square deal. And again, that also includes his regulation of trusts. So you see in this cartoon, he seems to have killed a quote unquote bad trust. But I know the image is a little grainy over here. The little baby bear that he's got on a leash is labeled a good trust. So he's not necessarily about just being a trust breaker in and of itself. He's about finding that ability to determine what is good for the nation. What's a good trust? What's a bad trust? Teddy Roosevelt's square deal. Now, as a bit of a progressive, Roosevelt famously is a conservationist. He's a sportsman, he's a naturalist, he's totally an outdoorsman. Remember, this is a man who, upon the death of his first wife and his mother on the same day, put himself out in the Badlands of South Dakota and became a rancher for some time. Teddy Roosevelt is responsible for adding millions of acres to the national forest system. He supports the Newlands Act or the National Reclamation Act, which provides federal money, again, using the government, right, to affect positive change in the lives of the people, to construct dams, reservoirs, and canals out west. We've had that conversation before when we were talking about westward movement, about just how important it is, right, to have viable water sources in the otherwise arid West and Midwest and Great Plains. Again, he's a champion of the national forest system. We talked previously about how Yellowstone and some other national parks had already existed, but we can thank Teddy Roosevelt for creating, as I said, millions and millions of acres in additional national parks. And to this day, Teddy Roosevelt is beloved by conservationist type folks. Okay. And that would include, despite a dust up we'll talk about in a second here, a man by the name of John Muir. Now, John Muir was the founder of the Sierra Club. Now, you may have heard of the Sierra Club. When we talk about political lobbies in Washington, D.C. That would be interest groups, right? That lobby Congress for legislation. You probably know of certain interest groups that are notable for their power today. The NRA, the National Rifle Association, of course, is kind of first and foremost when we think about powerful lobbies. The longest standing environmentalist lobbying organization is the Sierra Club, and it's founded by John Muir, who is also renowned as a photographer of nature. Uh, both being conservationists, Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir are close friends, and they do, however, right, have a little dust up, as I said, when we get to this Hetchy controversy. Again, I think what's notable for me about Teddy Roosevelt is that he's not necessarily um, married to any one single ideology, that he seeks out very often the middle ground, the square deal. And so, as much as a conservationist as he gets involved in this Hetchy, which is a valley in Yosemite National Park. Now, San Francisco loses their water supply as a result of the 1906 earthquake. And if you're curious, by the way, where you see the hyperlink for San Francisco, um, I have clipped in a YouTube clip of some recovered and colorized footage of the streets of San Francisco just a couple days prior to the earthquake. And it's fascinating to get a look. I highly recommend you click on that and check it out. No need to take notes on it, but just to get kind of a sense of what American cities look like at this time, with some more to us primitive automobiles and the San Francisco famous streetcars, and also some horse-drawn carriages in the street, and you get a sense of the American bustle that is taking place here in the early 1900s. And then I also clicked or linked rather where it says earthquake in 1906, a playlist of some videos related to this famous or infamous 1906 San Francisco earthquake. In any case, that earthquake disrupts the water supply in San Francisco. And despite major opposition from environmentalists and conservationists, including John Muir and the Sierra Club, Teddy Roosevelt gets on board in approving this project and building a dam right in the heart of the Yosemite National Park. Why would he do that as a conservationist? Because he thinks that the public good of ensuring a water supply for Western cities like San Francisco outweighs that particular conservationist effort. Okay, again, the Hetchy controversy speaks to Teddy as a square deal kind of guy. In terms of international policy, Teddy Roosevelt employs what we call big stick diplomacy. Um, Roosevelt recognizes that the United States has interest, and he believes the right to intervene in other areas of the world. Remember, America at this time is kind of put on our big boy pants. We're a little bit of this imperialist nation. And so you're going to see kind of a contrast between what we would call Teddy Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy and later what William Howard Taft will call dollar diplomacy, which quite frankly is also employed today with America's big stick diplomacy. It's that America can achieve political goodwill through investment around the world. Okay. But when Roosevelt pushes his big stick diplomacy, what he's essentially putting into place is what we know as the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Remember the Monroe Doctrine? James Monroe, actually, it was his Secretary of State, right, John Quincy Adams, who had written this policy essentially declaring that Latin America was off limits to the rest of the European powers. That in essence was in our hemisphere, and as America really put on her big boy pants for the first time. Uh, we're going to take care of what takes place right in our hemisphere. So when Roosevelt engages in big stick diplomacy, the Roosevelt corollary says that the United States also has the right to intervene herself in Latin America. Okay, so the Monroe Doctrine is, hey, Europe, stay out of this hemisphere, stay out of Latin America. That's in our backyard. Teddy Roosevelt says, yeah, it's in our backyard. And my corollary is that we have the right to intervene. Okay. And so Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy relies on speak softly, but carry a big stick. Okay. The big stick is a strong Navy and a strong military. And we can use kind of the threat of what is now, right, the world's third largest Navy to influence relationships with other nations. Okay. We're not necessarily going to engage in war, right? But we could, okay? We're speaking softly, but we're carrying the big stick. Now, that's still obviously, I think, a means of America's obtaining foreign policy objectives today. But it's not necessarily mutually exclusive of what Taft would have called dollar diplomacy. That, again, America can kind of buy goodwill in other areas of the world by investing, whether it be government investment or encouraging private American business investment internationally. Okay. Um, but we want to understand what we mean by big stick diplomacy. Okay, and there's a couple images here, right, of Roosevelt carrying the big stick, and of course the phrase comes from Roosevelt himself in a speech in 1901, shortly after taking office. Speak softly and carry a big stick. Okay, and that's how we're going to get things done. Referring, of course, to the military, political, and economic might of the United States. So this contrast between uh, big stick diplomacy and dollar diplomacy also hints at what I would say is a fairly interesting relationship, a dynamic between Teddy Roosevelt and actually his hand-picked successor to the presidency, William Howard Taft. So we know that Roosevelt became the accidental president in 1901. He is reelected easily again in 1904. And he's a little bit conflicted about leaving the presidency in 1908. But he decides to abide by this two-term precedent that is not yet right a requirement. We talked about constitutional amendments the other day, and you should recall right the Civil War amendments 13, 14, 15, and the Progressive Amendments 16 through 19. It's the 22nd Amendment that limits the president to two terms, and we ain't there yet. So Teddy Roosevelt has the right, if you will, to run for president again. He debates it. He's conflicted about it. He decides not to, but he handpicks his successor, William Howard Taft. And this is where things get a little tricky because I think kind of mentally, emotionally, spiritually, Roosevelt might not have quite been done with the presidency, which is why he picks the guy who's going to take over for him, essentially, right, and spurs him on and helps get him elected. But then he has this kind of reputation for, as these images would suggest, looking over the shoulder of Taft and kind of being a little bit of a nuisance to William Howard Taft. Uh, Here you see on his way out of the White House, he's passing along his policies. That's Roosevelt, of course, in the cowboy hat. This is the cover of Puck magazine, a famous satirical magazine of the day. He's passing along his policies to William Howard Taft, right? Like, hey, take care of my baby do with this, White House administration as I would. Okay. And this is a famous image called Baby Kiss Papa Goodbye. And then as Taft is in office, and as we'll see in a minute, I'm not really sure that Taft necessarily wants to be in office. Um, Roosevelt kind of has this reputation, as you see here, for kind of peering through the window, looking over his shoulder, being critical a little bit of Taft. Um, and it actually really complicates their relationship. Teddy shows a little bit of his dark side here. And admittedly, Taft, I think, was a little bit struggling with the demands of government. Perhaps not as much as he would have had he not been, feeling some sort of pressure from Teddy. But there's a pretty honest depiction of the state of affairs here in this image, another famous political cartoon. By the way, on both of these images, I've got hyperlinks to bring you to some more information if you're interested on those. But these are some images that I think you should be able to interpret with some ease, especially after you watch this video on William Howard Taft and how he feels about coming into the presidency in the first place, how he feels about struggling with the demands of the office, how he feels about this increasingly complicated relationship with Teddy Roosevelt, and he struggles. He struggles really in terms of some mental health while in the presidency. He gains a tremendous amount of weight. Infamously, he gets literally stuck in a bathtub. And I think he's incredibly relieved when he ultimately leaves office. In fact, he goes on to become a Supreme Court justice. So fascinating story to complement those two political cartoons we just took a look at. Click on this link now, please, and watch this video on President William Howard Taft. So, closing with Teddy for the day, right? We want to understand, and if you could do this in your notes, okay, 2 minutes, what would you write about Teddy Roosevelt's ascension through the political scene and into the office of the White House? What is he known for during his tenure as president? What key phrases, and can you explain them, right? Define Teddy as president. And again, I mean, I'll give away the shop here, right? But we want to understand certainly what we mean by square deal, and we want to go into, I think, some detail on that, as well as, of course, big stick diplomacy. So we've got a little bit on Teddy domestically and a little bit on Teddy in terms of foreign affairs. Okay, what is Teddy's legacy today, and how would you describe this relationship between Roosevelt and William Howard Taft? So these are some responses you should be able to get into your notes today. Okay. Um, Roosevelt comes back around again in the election of 1912. Um, Fascinating story here, and it's the story of third political parties in America. Um, Roosevelt decides, being dissatisfied with how William Howard Taft had taken care of his proverbial babies, that he was going to run for president again, two-term president be darned. But Taft, as the incumbent sitting in the White House on the Republican ticket, earns the Republican nomination. And so when Roosevelt decides to run again, he creates the Bull Moose political party. And it's definitely a party of progressivism, okay? Roosevelt is, no question about it, a progressive Republican. And really, as we see quite often in American politics, third parties don't win elections, but they certainly can lose elections. And we've seen this take place before, right? I think we see, with the election of 2000, that was razor thin between George H.W. Bush George W. Bush and Al Gore comes down to a Supreme Court case ruling on the counting of votes in Florida. Gore probably wins that election if it's not for a Green Party candidate, Ralph Nader. And we see some other instances of that um, since then. And certainly, I think we see it here in the election of 1912 when Taft's Bull Moose Party uh, essentially Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party essentially fractures Taft's Republican vote. Okay, and that's going to give us Woodrow Wilson as the next president of the United States, and that's an administration we'll get into next. But I think it's really important that we understand what happened in the election of 1912. I'm going to ask you to continue taking notes as you click on this video here, and then come back to me again. But this is a video on the election of 1912. Get to that. Let's come back here. Let's go. Okay, so now we have made our way through both the Roosevelt and then the Taft administrations. We are ready to begin the administration of Woodrow Wilson. And we're going to take a look at what progressivism is under Woodrow Wilson. And we're going to get into peace, and we're going to get into war, and we're going to get into chapter 29, where you have your next reading guide due. All right. So until next week, that's all I got for you today. Thanks, guys. Take care.